Good morning. So I want to thank everyone for the kind words I heard from last week. That meant a lot to me. I feel a little bit like I may have blown my wad in the first first session. So this here is a cave shrine of Benzaiten by Hiroshiga Ando from 1850, just if you're curious where that came from. So a different kind of vision of pilgrimage. Before we get too far, one of the things people have asked me is how do we hear recordings? And I just want to make sure everybody is aware of where you can go to get that. So I'm going to try to switch over to the St. Andrew homepage, and I think I might need to stop this to do that. Let's see. So, well, I thought this would be easy, but it is not. So if I can't bring it up, let me just try one thing here. I'm going to move to where there is a link and see. That is not bringing it up either. Okay, well, I will just tell you where it is. And if you need any further instructions, I'm happy to email with any of you. Let me get back to the home page here. Okay, but when you go to the St. Andrew homepage, there is a link that says education. And when you kind of mouse over that, it says adult education. And that has a little box that sends things out, but don't worry about that. Just click on adult education. And when you click on that, that will bring you a homepage, and the current sessions are at the top. So you have to scroll down a little bit, but you'll see my video from last week right at the top. And then you can go down a little further and see Jim Agason's classes. So if you missed that, you can go back and watch those, and there's other stuff up there. So I just, again, want to make it really easy for people to understand. They can go and, if you have to miss one, or if you want to go back in time, there's lots of stuff up there, and it is available for you. So sorry, I can't seem to get that to show up on that screen. So I've kind of been debating a little bit about what to call this session. I think I mentioned last time Mary and I are switching. So next week, Mary is going to talk about the kind of more traditional pilgrimage that she did in Spain. And then on the 26th, it's kind of a joke, but what I'm hoping you'll do is get some inspiration, both from last week, from this week, from what Mary has to say, and think a little bit about, the types of things that you might like to do in the future that you can now kind of view through the lens of a pilgrimage. And if you want to talk about things that you've done in the past, whether it's been a more formal pilgrimage, or I've had a couple people tell me stories of things they've done in the past that they're now kind of viewing as a pilgrimage that maybe they didn't before. I think it would be really great if we spent some time together and just kind of shared some stories and gave some ideas about what you might like to do in the future. So I'm not going to make people write something down or anything, so no stress. But I hope you'll think about it. And if you're inspired to share a little bit with that on the 26th. So today, like I say, I've kind of changed the title a little bit. Today I just kind of want to give some impressions of pilgrimage. We're going to look historical, we'll look at some other religions. Again, with a goal of just trying to get inspired. You can find inspiration in lots of places, and the more various ways of pilgrimage you hear, the more it will hopefully stick for you. It could be an actual physical journey, a spiritual pilgrimage, artistic pilgrimage, whatever you're inspired to do. So, as Christians, we often think of things through a Christian lens all the time. And that often leads us to blind spots. There's a lot going on around us that we just don't notice. This, for example, is from Mount Kailash in Tibet. So this is a pilgrimage site. It has nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with any of the Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism. This is something that is sacred to the Hindu, the Buddhist, the Jain, and the Bon religions. So this has been going on since way before the birth of Christ. I've seen some references to people walking in a spiritual way around this mountain for 15,000 years. That would certainly mess up the idea of the timeline some conservative Christians have. But regardless, it certainly happened long before Jesus was born. So this is one of the more challenging types of pilgrimage you could possibly do. The closest airport is about a 4-day trek by motor vehicle just to get there. So then when you get there, the place you start is at 15,000 feet of elevation. Now, my wife's family had a family reunion at the YMCA of the Rockies in Colorado, and that's 8,750 feet, and it kicked my butt. We were up there for, I think it was 3 nights or something, and I just didn't feel like myself the whole time I was there. I don't know how long it would have taken me to get accustomed to that. So imagine being nearly twice as high and then doing a pilgrimage. That's your starting point. So the pilgrimage is 32 miles. Most people do it in 3 days. Now, it's described as being fairly easy. I'm not quite sure that anything at over 15,000 feet is easy, but it doesn't have massive climbs and descents. You do gain about 800 feet at one point, so nothing, too wild, but I just can't imagine being at that high and doing that kind of a journey. There are people who do it in a day. And then there are also people who do that where however long distance, they're fully prostrate on the ground. So it's really quite something. One of the more famous pilgrimages, of course, is the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca for Muslims. This is one, of course, that we can't do, or presumably most of us can't do. These are road signs on the way to Mecca. You are not allowed to travel there. So if you can see the sign, it says turning right is only for Muslims. And it's patrolled, and I've heard anecdotes that if you turn down that road, they will pull you over and they will ask you questions. And if you are not allowed, or if you cannot prove to their satisfaction that you're Muslim, you will be deported. So they take that very, very seriously. So the Hajj is something that every Muslim must complete at least once in their lifetime if they are physically and financially able. But only if the absence of the person would not place hardship on the family. There is also a way that you can kind of nominate someone to go on your behalf if you're not able to. So it happens in the last month of the Islamic calendar. The Islamic calendar is lunar, so it is always out of sync with the calendar that we tend to use. And that means that there are festivals that are based on that calendar wander around our calendar. So this year it's from June 26th to the 1st of July. So it's a very short time. In order to complete the Hajj, you have to do it during that time. There's something called Umrah, where you go and do basically the same types of things in Mecca, and that is also considered holy, but it's not considered fulfilling your obligation. So many people do go to do that multiple times, both during Hajj or at other times of the year. Let's see here. So according to Muslims, the pilgrimage to Mecca goes back to the time of Abraham. So once again, this is way before the birth of Christ. When pilgrims are about 6 miles from Mecca, as they're kind of driving to, or however they're getting there, they change into a ritual garment. For men, it's not sewn. It's kind of a white robe. Women, it can be sewn, but it is white as well. They walk 7 times around the Kaaba. That's this structure you see there in the middle. It means cube, so pretty appropriately named. So as to fulfill the Hajj, they go counterclockwise around the Kaaba 7 times. They walk briskly back and forth between the hills of Safa and Marwa 7 times. Drink from the Zamran well. Go to the plains of the Mount of Arafat to stand in vigil. Spend a night in the plain of Muzdalifa, and perform the ritual of stoning the devil by throwing stones at 3 pillars. Then there's a sacrifice of an animal. And so during the Hajj, this very short period of time, 600,000 animals are sacrificed. The meat is distributed to the needy over 30 different countries. And so most people do not actually do the sacrifice themselves. You can get a little certificate, and then it will be done on your behalf. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that I know. I have in my mind, like a traditional one might be a goat, but I am speaking, yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll try to look that up. I know that, like in biblical sacrifices, there were often different animals used depending on the ability to finance it by the person who was doing the sacrifice. So if you didn't have a lot of money, it might be a bird. If you had more money, it might be a goat. And I'm wondering if it's similar, but I don't know for a fact. So then when these rites are finished, men shave their heads. I think in modern days there's some trimming rather than shaving, but times change. Women do a trim. That's the traditional thing. So before COVID, the number would be about 3 million people. And again, just during that short number of days. Things are starting to gear up again. This year, they're probably expecting maybe 2 million people. So again, I was going to show something, but it's on a different screen, and I don't think it'll work. But there are travel agencies that specialize in this, and it's really kind of interesting to look at how they do that. Most of the travel agencies will kind of have a basic package, and then gradually getting more and more expensive with more features. At the top end, you're staying at the Swiss hotel for a portion of it, and various, they have to stay at a tent for part of it. And so tent might be in quotation marks, they're made of like sheetrock and have air conditioning and but just to give you an idea, most of those packages, yeah, go ahead.
They don't have to be Muslim then?
No, they definitely have to be Muslim to do it, but anyone can look at the website. Right. No, these are travel agencies that are very specifically for Muslims, and you need to get special visas and permissions and all of this stuff. It's really highly regulated. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the average age of someone who goes to the Hajj?
I don't know the average age, but I have seen, an incredibly wide range of ages. I'm very aware of children going, and very old people going. I would guess the average age is probably in the 30s to 40s, just from the standpoint that that's when most of us are at a point in life where there's enough money to be able to make it happen, able to take a time off, that type of thing. Yeah, go ahead. Right. So just for the camera, I'll kind of repeat that she had an experience in Egypt with a family, and what that particular family did was kind of save up so that each year or every few years, one of the family members would be sent. So what were their ages when they would go generally? Do you have a sense of that, or? Yeah, but they were young-ish people. Yeah, young men. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's an incredible thing. Oh, I was going to say in terms of the, like I say, I think it's just really fascinating to look at these travel agencies and see these different packages, even though that's something we could never do, or at least I couldn't. From North America, a typical package starts at maybe $8,000 from New York. And then those same travel agencies will have packages for Umrah, which is not during that period of time. Those tend to start around $1,000. So there is an incredible tax for doing it at this particular time. I do recommend it. Do a Google search for travel packages, and they have different comparisons, and even though I was at one travel package company out of Detroit, and the language they used to describe it was just not language we would use. Lots of mentions of Allah's goodness, and out of the goodness of Allah we are able to so it's a nice little cultural experience just to see what you can find on the internet like that. So I recommend that. Yes.
You said they have to change into white robes or clothing about 6 miles out, but there are many people in that photo who appear to be wearing black or even Western clothing.
You're correct. I don't know why, other than times change, and I think some people do not take it exactly as seriously as others. One of the things we've talked about in some other classes is this massive division in Islam, the difference between Sunni and Shia. Saudi Arabia, which is where this is, Mecca, is Sunni, but this is kind of considered neutral ground in terms of making the Hajj or Umrah. There is no conflict to speak of for this type of thing. And I think in that same spirit, if someone comes and does Hajj in a way that maybe isn't completely traditional, it's not viewed as being faithful to make a big scene of that. You do have to be Muslim. I mean, there's no negotiating that one. I've only heard bad stories of people who tried to get close to Mecca or what have you. But beyond that, there is a certain tolerance. Another thing I find kind of interesting is that people do tend to travel and stay with people who are similar to them in terms of where they come from. So part of the Hajj, you're generally staying in tents, fairly near this square, or I guess it's not a square, this is a mosque, near this mosque. Depending on how much you pay makes a difference as to the distance. So you might be a half-hour walk away, you might be 5 minutes away. But very often those camps that are set up are based on nationality, or at least Western versus Eastern. So you see that in those travel agencies, that they kind of mention that as a real feature, that you will be with other Americans or other Westerners or what have you. And it kind of makes me think a little bit, and I don't have any insight to it, but, is that just because it makes it easier for people to converse and whatnot? Or is there kind of a undercurrent of racism there? I don't really know. But it's interesting. Yeah.
How about that?
Thank you.
So what about the role of women? 'Cause in Judaism, it's completely, the more religious, it's completely separate in terms of worship and all of that. And at the Hajj, are they just intermixed there? And
I mean, my understanding is that they are intermixed. However, it appears, and again, this is not speaking from incredible knowledge, just kind of my sense of the research I've done over the years, but there will be a lot fewer women than men. And, some of that is based on culture, some of that is based on, a man can take off from his job, but a woman can't take off from carrying the kids. That kind of thinking makes a big difference. But to my knowledge, in terms of the rights, other than those exceptions I mentioned about hair cutting and garments and things like that, they would do the same rights as far as I'm aware. Any other questions before we kind of move on from Islam? Anyway, I find this fascinating. This is one of those things where I wish I could experience it somehow. But yeah, go ahead.
Are the only people in Mecca, the town, Islamic?
Yes.
So there's nobody in that town that is.
So she was asking whether everyone in the town is Muslim, and to the best of my knowledge, there is no exception. It's possible there's some sort of a historical sub-community. I mean, it's an actual city. I mean, real people live there year-round. But my sense is that anyone who was not Muslim, who had ancestry there, would have been removed a long time ago. Like I say, this seems to be one area where there is no negotiation. About the best you can do is I have a friend who was in Saudi Arabia for quite a while, and he was able to go on a hilltop where he could kind of look down into Mecca. So that's, as far as I'm aware, the best you can do if you're not Muslim. Any other thoughts or questions before I move on? So that's where I was going to show the travel agency. So I could spend a lot of time going through a lot of different religions. I'll just do a couple real briefly. I mentioned the Shia and the Sunni. The Shia, which are not generally in Saudi Arabia, they do go on the Hajj, but they also have their own pilgrimage. This is a pilgrimage to the city of Karbala in Iraq. You may have heard Karbala as it kind of came up through some of the wars and things that we've promulgated. But this is an amazing thing that I wasn't aware of until I started looking into it. Every year, 20 million people go on a pilgrimage to Karbala. Every single year. So this one is specifically Shia. It celebrates a Shia warrior, and that starts getting really icky when you start talking to Sunnis about it. There is definitely a big divide there. Another one that I thought was kind of interesting is the Baha'i religion. So that's another religion that kind of has written into their holy literature, you must go on pilgrimage. But they have a big problem, and that is that their holy cities are in Iraq and Iran, and they are absolutely not welcome there. So what they kind of did was they created their own holy area out of, from scratch in Israel. So this is near Haifa, Israel. And so someone who takes a Baha'i pilgrimage would now go to Israel. So I thought that was really interesting where, the idea of pilgrimage was so strong, that when it became impossible or next to impossible to do it the way that they had traditionally done it, they wound up creating new ways of doing pilgrimage that would not get them into political trouble. So this is in India. Sikhism doesn't have really a tradition in their literature for pilgrimage. However, over the years, pilgrimage has become a part of many people's faith journey if they are Sikh. And so there are a number of kind of important places of worship in India. And so Sikhs will often do a pilgrimage to visit these important places. So that's just kind of an illustration of how that desire for the benefits of pilgrimage is very universal almost, even when it is not an intrinsic part of the religion. Yeah, Larry.
There's another pilgrimage we found out on a trip to Europe this past September, to Trier for communists, because that's where Karl Marx was born. So, and there's a huge statue of him there.
We actually are, my family is friends with the mayor of Trier. And I talked about that in another class a little bit. And he has stories to tell. It is very strange being the mayor of a German city that gets busloads and busloads of hardcore communists. Thank you, that's good. So I wanted to just include one from the Far East. This is the Shikoku pilgrimage. There's an island in Japan called Shikoku, and there are 88 Buddhist temples around the island. And so this pilgrimage is about 750 miles long. So if you do it on foot, it's between 30 to 60 days. So today, many people who still feel strongly that this is something they need to do, they'll do it by car or by bus or taxi even. Other people do it in sections. So they'll have a week vacation and they'll do a portion of it, and then a few years later they'll come back and do another portion of it. They have this belief that these visited sites have great spiritual energy and power, and that the pilgrimage is an expression of devotion and faith, and that the pilgrims gain spiritual merit. So again, everybody has a little different twist, but a lot of universal themes across all these religions. So I want to talk a little bit about Christian pilgrimage. So, I mean, one perspective on pilgrimage is that it's a journey intended to become closer to God. And it's hard to imagine feeling further from God than after having just been exiled from the Garden of Eden. So one way of kind of looking at that story is that from that point on, Adam and Eve's journey was a pilgrimage to become closer to God. Another example is Abraham. He left Ur in Mesopotamia because God called him to found a new nation in a undesignated land that would eventually become Canaan. And again, Muslims have a strong connection to Abraham, and so some of their ideas of pilgrimage are based on some of these ideas that we might share. If you kind of squint a little bit, you might look at the exodus of the Israelites as a pilgrimage. I'm not quite sure if wandering in the desert for 40 years is a pilgrimage, but it certainly was a journey. It certainly brought them closer to God. It just took a long time. I like this picture. This is, it looks like Moses is doing his Harry Potter impression here. So whether you think of these examples that I've given from the Bible as examples of pilgrimage, the Jewish tradition kind of before Jesus and then during his life definitely had pilgrimage as a strong element. Judaism before the temple was destroyed in 70 AD was completely centered around the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, there were 3 pilgrimage festivals. There was Passover, but then there was also the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Booths. And Passover is why we have the only story of Jesus as a boy in the Bible. If you remember the story, he and his family went to Jerusalem for Passover. And then on their way out of town, Mary and Joseph thought Jesus was with friends. And then they kind of asked the friends, and they're like, we haven't seen Jesus. And realized that he just wasn't with any of the groups that were heading back, so went all the way back to Jerusalem and found him in the temple with the scholars, learning from them and asking questions of them, and I'm about my Father's business, that whole thing. But that was a pilgrimage. That's why they were doing it, was a traditional Jewish pilgrimage. So then without a temple, after the temple was destroyed, then that's where Judaism kind of became much more rabbinical. So instead of being centered on the physical temple, the religion became much more centered on the position and authority of a rabbi. So they kind of lost some of their pilgrimage tradition. Of course, in more recent times, the Jewish pilgrimage to Israel has become a very strong thing. Again, whether folks view it exactly as a pilgrimage or not, but I think it kind of hits most of the highlights for it. Some people even wind up living there for a long time. So our first, oh boy, that didn't come out at all, did it? Oh, you can see it a little bit. The first recorded early Christian pilgrimage, so not biblical, but Christian, so post Jesus, is from kind of an anonymous person called the Bordeaux Pilgrim. This is in 333 AD. So this anonymous pilgrim kind of wrote down a literature map. So instead of drawing a map like this, he wrote down, you start in this city, and it's about this length to this city, and this is a good place to take a break. And then you go a little further, and it's this far, and then this is a good place to overnight, and just trace the entire route from Bordeaux all the way to Jerusalem. And then when in Jerusalem, then the tone of what he wrote changed, and it becomes kind of one of the only examples of writing of somebody who was not from the Middle East writing about what they were seeing at that time in Jerusalem. So it's kind of interesting in terms of him describing seeing these holy sites and making ridiculous mistakes. At some point he's saying, I saw this and this here, and that was not the right place. So a lot of things, but they did the best they could at the time. And it's one of the few records we have of anything quite like that. And then on the way back, he didn't go all the way back to Bordeaux, he went to Milan. But then did the same thing again, just kind of wrote, from here to here is so long and all that kind of stuff. And so that's one of the ways that we know that pilgrimage was definitely something that existed at that time. So that we also know that pilgrimage was encouraged by Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great. And I should say that the Bordeaux pilgrim lived at the time of Constantine. So that's how that worked. And so Helena was kind of given free rein to actually go on a pilgrimage herself, go to the Holy Land, try to preserve holy places and bring back relics. So She established many churches on this trip, or at least this is what we're told. And what she is very well known for is finding the true cross. So the story goes that there was a pagan temple on the place where Jesus was crucified. And so now that Constantine was in power, it was okay to take those down. So she had that taken down and had them excavate the site. And what do you know? They found 3 crosses. What a shock. But she was not convinced that they were the actual crosses. So how do you figure out if you actually have the real crosses? So what they did was they found a dying woman and dragged this poor woman over to where they were, and they had her touch the first cross, and nothing happened. Then they had her touch the second cross, and nothing happened. Then they had her touch the third cross, and what do you know? She recovered. So that became the true cross. So of course, they built another church on the spot, as you do, you know. It's truly amazing what you can find if you're the mother of the emperor, you know. And she brought back many other relics. So this might be, you know, where some of the idea of, you know, every church needs a relic, you know, where that kind of started. It took a little while before it really took off, but you can see the beginnings of that. So Jerusalem was obviously the main goal. That makes the most sense. But then there was a problem. It was taken over by Muslims. So that became very, very difficult as a pilgrim destination. Some people still did it. I give them a lot of credit. That would have been pretty risky. But really, most people just kind of wrote that off as not being possible. But the idea of pilgrimage was still there. And so what they replaced Jerusalem with at first was often Rome. And so this is a map of the Via Francigena pilgrimage. So the traditional start is Canterbury, and then the end is Rome. Lots of people did this pilgrimage of a sort, but not everybody started from Canterbury. You know, people would just start from wherever they were nearby, and then head to Rome on this route. Now this route isn't incredibly specific. It kind of changed over time based on everything from the seasons. You know, at one time of the year, you could save some miles by going over this mountain pass. Other times of the year, that's a bad idea. So there was a lot of that kind of variation. There was kind of trends that changed it over years. So a lot of the churches along the way, or monasteries or what have you, would kind of like, hey, come visit us. We have, you know, XYZ. This is a great reason to come visit us. And that would become popular. And then that would be part of the route for however many years. And then another church would kind of make a better offer. And that would become the route. But another interesting thing, too, is that this was not just a repurposing of commercial routes. Sure, it was to a certain extent, but traditionally this route was much more abbey to abbey rather than it was, you know, from town center to town center. There's been kind of a revival with this route. So it is definitely something you can get maps on and people do today. And if you're hiking on a portion of it, you'll often see little markers to tell you you're on the path, and it'll be somebody who looks like a pilgrim with a cane, you know, that kind of thing. That may have been the case in Spain too. Did they have that, the markers with the pilgrim? Yeah. So this is one of the more popular modern ones as well. So when we get to about the 11th century or so, that's when relics really started to become a big deal. So it just was, you had to keep up with the Joneses if you were a bishop. You know, you needed your cathedral to have relics. And soon every major church and even a lot of minor ones had something that they were claiming was, you know, a portion of the cross or nails from the cross or part of the crown of thorns, or you name it, there was something there. This is just an example of a reliquary which holds the relic that's contained inside. And I mean, to this day, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of churches across Europe that still have some sort of a relic that probably came from, you know, about that time. Yeah. How many heads of John the Baptist are there? I am aware of 3. And there's probably more that are claimed. Yeah. It really became a competition. And that also became connected with pilgrimage. I think at first a lot of it was kind of what I was saying before, these waypoints on these more traditional pilgrim routes. But over time, some of the relics became a pilgrimage destination of their own. And you can still see that in you know, if you look for pilgrimage routes you can take today, many of them are going to a place that gained prominence because of the relics they contained. So that's a pretty common thing. Let's see here. So I want to talk about Luther for a little bit. Yeah, go ahead.
Were the Crusades considered a pilgrimage?
I think with hindsight, for sure. I'm definitely seeing people classifying that. I'm not 100% sure if they would have considered themselves a pilgrim. I'm not aware of that, but it's in the ballpark. Definitely the people who went on crusades voluntarily and for spiritual reasons would have had ideas in their head that are very similar to pilgrimage, so I think that's fair. Any other questions while we're breaking here? So I'm going to move a little bit faster here just so I'm not keeping you for too long today. But Martin Luther went on a pilgrimage. He went to Rome. Now there was kind of a business aspect to it. This is when he was a monk, and his monastery had a beef with the powers that be in Rome, and they wanted to have him negotiate a better resolution to whatever their problem was. There's also some evidence to suggest that Luther was kind of a pain in the neck. And so they wanted to get him out of ways a little bit, and maybe, you know, this journey will rub off some of the sharp edges, you know. If that's what they thought, it did not happen. But he is said to have, this is supposed to be when he's viewing Rome for the first time, that he said, "Hail to thee, O holy Rome." And I think it is almost certainly true that he did view it, you know, in spite of the other tasks he had to do, as a pilgrimage. The problem is it didn't go well. I don't know about the business aspect of it, but in terms of a faith journey, he basically saw all this corruption and ineptitude around him of the Roman leaders, the church leaders, and became very disillusioned. And so if you want to kind of trace some early moment where he might have started getting his ideas about, you know, how the church has lost its way, I think this trip is definitely a key moment for him. In terms of his teaching after about pilgrimage, as he became a young reformer, he wasn't that bent out of shape about it, about the concept of pilgrimage. He was kind of like, you know, you don't really need to do it, and people are doing it for the wrong reasons. And as he got older, as with many things with Luther, he became more and more strident against the idea of pilgrimage. In 1520, he declared all pilgrimage should be stopped. There is no good in them, no commandment enjoins them, no obedience attaches to them. Rather do these pilgrimages give countless occasions to commit sin and dispense God's commandments. And he got worse after that. But again, if you read Luther, that's kind of his trajectory. He started very open about different ideas and what. He had his own ideas, they were always clear about that. But he wasn't that bent out of shape about what other people were doing. And as he got older and older, he became much more strident about things. So I'm going to move ahead. I just want to talk a little bit about this website, just because I thought it was kind of interesting. When I was doing some research and just looking around, I ran into a website that's been created by a woman named Lacey Clark Ellman at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. I don't know much about that school. It's actually hard to find out much about that school, which I'm not sure what that tells you. But it does appear to be kind of a non-denominational, it is accredited theological institute of a sort. But she has a website that is completely about pilgrimage. And I think she has some really interesting ideas. And so I do recommend giving it a look. Lots of different topics there. The one I wanted to highlight, which I'm not going to do right now, are the 10 types of pilgrimage. I'll just kind of blow through them. This is her ideas, and she fully admits these are not all 10. This is not complete. This is, there's, but it's good to think about it. So traditional pilgrimage, ancestral pilgrimage. So that's a little bit like I was talking about last week. The idea of sabbatical. Solidarity pilgrimage. So that might be a pilgrimage to help other folks out with, volunteerism. It might be just to learn about other people's experience and culture. Pilgrimage of personal or cultural significance. You can tell a lot of these kind of overlap. Nature pilgrimage. That's a nice one. Threshold pilgrimage. So this is kind of like my husband died and I'm entering a new phase of my life. This is a chance for me to kind of clear a lot of the cobwebs and start anew, that kind of thing. Discovery pilgrimage, this is kind of, could border on just taking a trip, but that's fine too. Remember, self-care is important, right? Retreat, so this could be a mini pilgrimage. That might be a nice way to look at those, 1 day or 2 day retreats that you might want to go on. Make that a little mini pilgrimage, why not? And interior pilgrimage, so pilgrimage of the mind or of the soul. One thing that struck me that wasn't included there was kind of a health pilgrimage. That, there's a tradition in the Catholic Church of, going to Lourdes. There's a list of all of them in one place. Lourdes, to be healed, right? So that's kind of one extreme of it, touch the water and magic things happen. But, I think for a lot of us, when we're not healthy, whether that be in body or in mind, we can really benefit from some sort of a pilgrimage, whether that's a physical pilgrimage or a pilgrimage of the mind or what have you. And I think I'm going to stop there just because I don't want to let this go too long. One thing I'm going to ask you about on the last day is the timing of these adult education, because we're kind of in a new space since we're only doing one service. I'm very much in the habit of thinking of these as 45 minutes, and they've got to be no longer, no less, because of the 2 services we had. So I couldn't start it too early because people were coming from the second service and they had a start time where they needed to, where they expected it to start at. And I couldn't go too long because I didn't want to run into the other service. Wanted to give people enough time to get centered and ready for worship. And now we don't really have that constraint. And so I want some feedback, not necessarily now, but some feedback of how, what's comfortable for you. I kind of thought of this as mostly a 45-minute-ish class. I know that Jim went over an hour. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm wondering, I'm also on the adult education team, so we talk about, recruiting teachers and talk about what we want to tell the teachers in terms of how to prepare for class. So I want you to think about that as something you can give the adult education team feedback about. Do we want to set parameters for time? Do we always want to start at 11, even if sometimes there's a long wait, different things like that. So anyway, that's my parting shot for today. So thank you very much.